Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Polity's podcast. We're happy to announce what you've already heard.
It's only been a week.
Roe is dead, and we have killed him.
Yeah, awesome.
So Roe v. Wade is gone,
Indeed.
and it seems to open up an opportunity for reflection
I should say so.
on what's next.
It's a pretty intense reflection.
And I'll start with a mea culpa here, because I'll be honest, I didn't expect this to happen.
Me either.
Which is funny, right? Because, I grew up in a pro-life family. We went to the March for Life. I've written on this, thought of this, argued for this. And the overturn of Roe v. Wade was almost universally within Christian circles and pro-life circles, Catholic circles, considered as the goal.
Absolutely.
That's
right.
what we got to do.
Yep.
And I think I just imbibed that sort of with the air I breathed growing up. And then for it to actually happen, there was a certain unsettling experience. It wasn't like a immediate, hooray, we did it. It was like, whoa, how did that happen?
It's unsettling. There was something comforting. Comforting maybe isn't the right word. It's like disturbing, but comforting in a stable regime.
Sure.
Right. And
Right.
for Roe versus Wade to be overturned feels like it's a piece of the overturning of one regime and the opening for the possibility of another. And there is something unsettling in that.
Absolutely.
Even though glorious.
Totally. One of the reasons that I thought that Roe v. Wade would not be overturned was because it seemed like our liberal regime was incapable, or at least unwilling, to step beyond the logic of legal precedent.
Mm-hmm.
And the kind of enforcement of what we've always done. And that because Roe v. Wade had been defended in Casey essentially on the basis of, well, we already made the decision,
Mm-hmm.
so we have to be consistent as a court. That we would turn and say, no, in fact, it was a mistake to begin with. And it's not where we're going to draw precedent from, but we're going to look to other sources, was surprising and creative.
Yes.
To my mind.
Yes. Very much so. And there could have been, maybe this sounds very strange to say, but it would have been less unsettling had the courts ruled somehow against abortion. Now the courts are ruling that abortion is illegal, basically, right? Like there would have been something totalizing about it that would have been an inversion of the totalizing of the Roe regime.
Yeah.
But to declare that the questions surrounding abortion are unknown, like the answers are not yet determined,
Yeah.
or that they are still debated, or that the morality is unclear, that this isn't just a direct, so it's not some sort of direct appeal to some sort of transcendent notion of human rights,
Right.
but an appeal back to the political process. Like this has to go back to the people who make these decisions.
Yeah.
Is profound. I mean, because I think the liberal regime has sought to eliminate politics through the creation of a seamless framework of rights in which the political becomes, in a sense, obsolete.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? Like, well, this has been decided by the priests of the rights, of what rights are and what rights are not, and somehow it's been integrated into the Constitution,
Yep.
which is the sort of scripture of the liberal regime.
Right.
And so these issues are outside of our hands or something.
Mm-hmm.
But to actually put it back in our hands is a much more profound move.
Right.
Do you see what I'm trying to say there? Like now it is a question of the political apparatus in the various states to determine the answer to the question, is abortion acceptable?
Right.
I mean, that's the foundation of those are the foundational questions. I mean, when you look at the history of political thought, the status of the child is the foundational question, isn't it? don't you think? Because it is the foundation of dependence, the foundational relationship of inequality. So a distinction in power.
Yep.
And then how do you deal with a dramatic distinction in power? What is the conditions under which that a relationship of extreme power differential can exist, or what are the ways in which we understand it? Are those ways in which we understand it form the principles for the foundation of the society as a whole?
Right. Yeah, it seems that liberalism has always had this problem with the child, because the child is obviously entirely dependent on its parents for its existence. And so the idea that you could somehow have, I mean, what we have essentially done is had an argument about competing rights. Since Roe v. Wade, it seems like we've just had an argument about competing rights, which is namely that, well, there's these rights within the tradition that the mother has to bodily autonomy, to apparently a right for privacy. And then there's also these rights that the child has, but the child has as this sort of individual unit, right? Like there's this potentially a right to life, a right. And so what we've actually had is the competition between how those rights are negotiated.
That's right. Yeah.
So, okay, the Supreme Court made it an issue of rights, of abstract principles, and then the question was simply, well, with Roe, it was that somehow the child has a right to exist that's only in play, as it were, when it's viable. And then in Casey, the child only has this right to exist insofar as it's not producing any kind of undue burden on the mother who has her own rights.
Right. Yeah.
And so then the pro-life movement is put into this position of arguing on that basis.
No, in order to get regulations or restrictions on abortion into law, we had to argue within the regime of Roe and Casey.
Yeah.
That had to happen. It was the only way to do it.
Yeah.
So you ended up asserting rights of the child and then arguing that there wasn't an undue burden on the rights of the mother.
Yeah. So for instance, like the various halfway measures on abortion that we've seen legally, like heartbeat bills.
Sure.
Where the argument is not, well, the effect is not a ban on abortion. There's no claim that abortion is wrong and one ought not do it. There's a claim that, well, if we wait as long as it takes for the fetal heart to start beating, then there's a technical chance for abortion. Right.
It's not an undue burden on the rights of the mother. She has a chance to abort the child if she wants to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating, right? And totally dissatisfying for the Christian and really anyone who's just trying to be good. Which is to say, if abortion is wrong, right? It's wrong for as long as the child exists.
It's wrong from the beginning to the end.
Yeah.
It's wrong for the same reasons it's wrong to kill the 5-year-old.
Exactly.
And there's those sorts of lines become meaningless, but they were not meaningless within the Roe regime. We had, like, the pro-life movement had to do that in order to stop abortion as much as possible.
Yes, because, and that sometimes gets confusing or alarming, but there's essentially two modes here, right? There's the actual motivating principle behind the pro-life movement is that abortion is wrong and shouldn't happen.
It's a moral conviction, yes.
Yeah. And then using the ideas of a right for life, to life, of a sort of, autonomous individual right that the fetus has that can be respected after a certain point. And no one believed that. It doesn't seem to me that anyone believed that. They simply put it forward as, well, this will work.
This will work. This will get through the regime.
The evil
this
of
is
abortion.
the language the regime uses.
Yeah.
This is the idiom that the juridical regime speaks, and so we have to speak it in order to get our to affect our will, which is to end abortions.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's not untrue. There is a right to life in a sense, right? I mean, if you're compelled to translate justice into the language of liberalism, which is a practice wrought with problems because you can't really do it. But if you're compelled to do it as best you can, that's the kind of language you have to use.
Yeah.
Right. What's fascinating here then is it would seem to me that the pro-life movement within states that are open to life is free from that now. Right. Like we can now start to formulate the actual arguments against abortion.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think this happened on like an individual level where in debate you would have to make arguments that weren't satisfied. Like as someone who's pro-life, your arguments would have to satisfy the basic presumptions of Roe versus Wade.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Now they don't.
That's right. Yeah, that indeed. And I actually think the arguments that we get to start making here were arguments that we were already making internally.
Yeah, totally.
But couldn't make in the public arena, and that they're actually far more powerful politically.
Totally.
So to argue, like for example, to start to argue not on in terms of competing rights, but rather to start to argue for a fundamental political anthropology that sees relationality between persons as fundamental rather than accidental, so that, for example, I'll just go into that. Like when a mom or a woman becomes pregnant, she's no longer just the woman she was. She's now a mother, and the child is now her child, and there's a relationship that emerges at the instant of the existence of that child, right? And that relationship is now the political reality. Where it's not two individuals with rights and the deals and all of that. Now the political reality is that those are now persons, which means individuals in relation to other persons. And so now the political regime looks at that relationship as what's there. Similarly, but as soon as that occurs, right, as soon as that child comes into being, and so now there's a relationship between the woman and the child as mother and child, there is, at the exact same time, at the exact instant, that woman is now a mother to everyone else as well, right? So her relations have now changed to the rest of her family, to her friends, to society as a whole. Yeah. She's now a mother.
Yeah.
And so you can say, we can start talking about, well, as a mother, there are certain obligations, duties, aspects of care that are necessitated by motherhood to the child. That's absolutely true, right? So it becomes the forbidding of abortion becomes a positive thing, because to abort is to violate a positive relationship.
Yeah, right.
Right. But at the exact same instant, there are the same sort of care that is now obligatory on all the people who are in relations to the mother.
Right.
Because now the political reality is the mother-child relationship.
Right. Yeah, right? That's phenomenal. And it's like the object of politics has shifted from the abstract notion of individuals who never quite exist, because relationship is real.
Right.
It's shifted. So now we're no longer saying, okay, here's this field of individuals, here's some fetal individuals, here's some individuals who have the extrinsic attribute of motherhood in relation to the fetal individuals. Instead of looking at that, we're saying here is a mother, which means a relation. And that relation has obligations. That relation can be judged. And in fact, we do this. I mean, this is what's...
Of course we do.
Something that New Polity always finds this problem is that when we talk about liberalism, we're talking about a regime that's totalitarian in its aspirations, but not in it in fact.
and a regime that's really fundamentally dishonest. Totally. It's a lying regime.
So what actually happens when women become mothers is that they become governed by a community that expects that they are using their relative power for the sake of their child. So this has been one of these oddities of the abortion regime, right? Where you can kill your child, but you can't drink while you're pregnant.
You can't have a glass of wine when you're pregnant, right? No, that's like a social taboo where like the waiter will refuse service to you
totally.
Because you're violating your obligations to this child, and all of society is invested in this relationship because it's a part of the political whole. That's
law. That's an enforced law.
Absolutely right.
Yep. And it's also sometimes actually a positive law, but the point is that it's not it doesn't matter. The point is that there is a human custom which judges all law that you don't get to drink while you're pregnant because it's dangerous
Right.
to the fetus. While the same person who would deny you the drink, right, would rhetorically, or at least would protect your right to kill that same child.
Yeah, it's incoherent.
It's totally incoherent. It's like, well, if I can kill him, why can't I mess him up a little?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Exactly. No. All right. Of course.
So, but the reason for that incoherence is because there's a reality that we can't quite get over. Reality is stronger than liberalism, turns out. And so what actually happens is that we are relational beings. We are always already in relation, and when we see ourselves and and other people blossom into new relations, we understand this part of what this is, part of what makes it so beautiful, is that it's a taking on of new obligations, of new responsibilities by nature. Like the mere fact of the relation means, like, you don't get to talk about motherhood and then talk about its obligations as this extrinsic list.
Right.
It's like being a mother is to be already caring for a child. I mean, that's what's so awesome about motherhood and pregnancy, is that people talk about it. We want to make it a choice. But it's like it's only a choice made for a choice that exceeds you. Like your body is already caring for the child.
Yes.
So now the question is, what next?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so we live in a society that actually governs relationships, that actually understands mothers to be awesome and to be worthy of an intense and maybe really the highest level of care from the rest of society, right? So just as you're shamed for not devoting power to the weak when you're a mother by being irresponsible or something, universal opprobrium. Mm-hmm. So too, there's almost not as strong, but almost a nearly universal opprobrium for the neglect of mothers. So to be in a position of power and to then to see a mother with her child and to be oppressive in any way it's beyond faux pas.
Oh well, look at. Just the other day, that horrible murder on the streets of New York, right? Where it's national news. I mean, there are thousands of murders in this country. I mean, murders are just happening continuously, but a mother walking her baby down the street, getting shot in broad daylight, is shocking beyond the myriad of murders that are occurring all the time. Precisely because it's like you shot a mom.
Yeah.
Right, like a mom with her baby,
right,
who's fulfilling this fundamental. I think there's a real sense that when you see a mother with her child, you're seeing the reality of common good, right? That like the good of the child and the good of the mother and the good of society are all wrapped up in that relationship.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
And to somehow enact violence against that relationship is not some violation of individual rights. It's not like stealing somebody's bike off their front porch or something, right? Like to actually violate that relationship is to go at the very heart of the common project.
Yeah.
Of some pursuit of common good.
So you argue, as I understand it, that with the death of Roe v. Wade, we have a moment
There's a
of
moment
possibility in which we can reframe the proper object of politics. No longer the liberal assumption that the proper object of politics is the individual who's understood as an atomized individual, so apart from his relationships, with a battery of rights that are fundamentally granted by the state. So then all political argument just becomes like, okay, well, how do we negotiate the fact that this individual has a right that seems to be in competition with that individual who has a right? And we have just competing interests. It's like a marketplace for rights, and then we fight it out. So you're saying this seems to be a moment in which the object of politics can be enshrined in positive law by states to be the relationships themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
Mothers have duties, children have duties, and the use of positive law is precisely to protect those, or rather, to recognize those as the proper object of politics, which seems to me to open up the whole Catholic tradition of subsidiarity as genuinely possible, right? Because when you can judge a relationship as coming with obligations and responsibilities, you can also judge when it fails and when intervention is necessary.
Yeah, you're also asserting that the relations that form the foundations for political reality are not constituted by the state, right? So like the mother-child relationship is not a juridical one. Totally. It only becomes a juridical relationship when something goes wrong in it.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Like it is intrinsic to humanity. It's the way we argue that we're political in our natures, not merely political as artifact or as a construction, right? So then you can say, well, the regime, the positive political regime. So you're talking about subsidiarity, like different levels of political regime the law becomes more general or more abstract as you move up. And as you get up towards the top, then it becomes closer perhaps to what we're used to, closer to, because it loses, the higher you get, the more it loses sight of the particular reality of particular relational structures, right? Mm-hmm. But the point would be that it would always, it begins to understand itself not as holding in being a political reality that goes all the way from top to bottom like the liberals do, but rather in having a particular role in assuring that the political reality thrives. Mm-hmm. It's a totally different, completely different regime.
You're right. We're political animals. So like the fact that we are born in dependence to people who have great power relative to us means that we're born into politics.
That's absolutely correct. And the
not
theorists,
that the state says, okay, here's some individuals and they all agree to be in a kind of community together to negotiate their interests. Like it's just two different anthropologies.
It's totally different. And there's an absurdity in the sort of Lockean social contract conceptions, because it really does reduce to the idea that society is second, right? The individual is prior, society is second. But that is just factually absurd. Mm-hmm. Like that's not what happens. And the good theorists know this. I mean, if you look at even someone like Filmer, who Locke's arguing against, right, the absolutist, and he'll say he builds his whole political theory starting with the assumption that the fundamental political unit is the man, who he says is like Adam, mm-hmm. From the garden, the man who has the power of life and death. And to buy and sell his children. I mean, he says this. There's no distinction between slaves and children. The father can buy, sell, or kill them, right? This is the beginning. Hobbes is similar. Like Hobbes says, okay, he has this whole state of nature thing, war of all against all that stuff is going on. But then later in the Leviathan, he goes, but in reality, in actual practice, the state of nature occurs when a new child enters into the world, and he's positioned in this relationship with his mother, who has the power to kill him.
Wow.
So the fundamental political act for Hobbes is, does she expose the child or does she keep the child? And if she keeps the child, then the child is now under her domination. She dominates the child. She owns the child. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, this is the way in which they can make their absolutist positive regimes go all the way down to the beginning of humanity. Right, all the way down. There's nothing that falls outside of it.
Gotcha. Right,
and those are that's the basis of modern politics. It doesn't matter what branch of modern politics you're in. Right, the problem of the child and inserting the child into a structure of really a juridical structure that is not analogical in its hierarchy, but is univocal, right? It's the same all the way through. The relationship between the mother and the child is no different than the relationship between the mother and her employer. Right. I mean, it's juridically identical.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's, you can imagine what that's doing. That is a flattening of society, an individualization of society, so that it can then be reunited. Those individuals can now be reunited under a sovereign power. Mm-hmm. Right. That's the tactic the absolute monarchs are taking. That's what the liberals are doing. Yep. That's what they're doing. And so what and the abortion regime then was, the Roe regime was the way in which we faced that fundamental problem of the child and integrated into our totalizing regime.
Why did Roe v. Wade?
Because it characterized the relationship as one of rights, right? Of a relationship of rights. Mm-hmm. And
rights are granted by the state. They're not pre-political. I mean, political in the...
Rights are very weird. I mean, they're literally granted by the state. I mean, that's what the word means. I mean, it's a law. It's a, I mean, and they are negative. So they're very peculiar because they only make sense in the context of a relationship of some sort. I have a right to something. That's always somehow implying that there's someone else who's going to threaten it somehow.
Yeah.
But they don't assert the reality of that other party.
Gotcha.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they just make it like it belongs to you as
like
an
it's somehow
individual.
in me,
Yeah.
not in the other party.
Right.
And that's a way of establishing some juridical basework for foundation for juridical relationship that doesn't presuppose the existence of a relationship.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's a trick.
Yeah.
And the way to get out of it is to understand that relationship is actually the reality, always. Mm-hmm. Okay, so and that those relationships have common goods that are actually the telos of the persons in those relationships.
Yeah. They're not like arbitrarily chosen by individuals.
No,
They're like already at play.
already at play. It's like if you're a mother,
Yeah.
your happiness is found in the happiness of your children.
Yeah. And it's not
And
like
there's no like other way of having happiness.
right.
That is now your end, and it's the same end as the children.
Totally.
Okay, so which is the end of a happy family. Okay, that is now what you are, and there's nothing you can do to your children that will change that fact. And we know this. Again, you say how reality breaks in, like the attempt to destroy that fact that as a mother your happiness is now bound to the happiness of your children has led to a great amount of unhappiness among women. I mean, I think there's a great amount of guilt, of frustration
Totally.
among American women because they're placed where their motherhood is in competition to these other ends they're supposed to be pursuing.
Yep.
Right. And you have to choose, and that's the big negotiation, and you're shortchanging your kids and do this, and you feel guilty about it. And again, that is that reality, that the reality of the anthropology we're talking about breaking through. Like that's actually the truth.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, no, it is funny because I've never met a mother who is satisfied unless they break out of this paradigm. Mm-hmm. And it would seem to be that if liberalism is true and that we really are individuals who enter into contracts, that's the basis of our relationships, that you would be able to find fulfillment as a mother, right? You would be able to find fulfillment by, choosing motherhood on this hand and choosing career on the other hand. But in actual fact, everyone knows that you can't have both, and so you sacrifice one or the other.
That's right. Yeah.
But because there's this ideology that's telling you that that's not the case, it's frustrating. Mm-hmm. Right? Because you're supposed to be able to have motherhood as a choice and to have career as a choice and to be able to be a, self-motivated individual who's seeking her own fulfillment.
Yeah, right. And that the same unhappiness is present everywhere. We're focusing on the mother-child relationship because we're talking about abortion. But the same discontent among the men is rooted, I think, in their failure to understand that their happiness, that their good is now tied in directly to the happiness and good of their wife and children.
Right.
Okay, so like you're now a father.
Right.
Now you care for these people.
Right.
And that is your only path to happiness.
Yeah, it's so funny, right? Because we acknowledge this, like even at sort of state level propaganda, we're always talking about the importance of father. I mean, every now and then we kind of stir up the machine to talk about the importance of fatherhood, because it turns out when you have an absence of fatherhood, it creates all sorts of problems. Mm-hmm. So we recognize that people flourish in their relationships in a fundamental way. Mm-hmm. It's just that in order to have a consistent or coherent legal project, we have to deny it at other levels and make fatherhood.
It's like you deny it, you take it away with one hand and then try to put it back with the other.
Yeah, I think
right. And then you say, actually, it's a big sea of individuals who are competing against each other for the fulfillment of whatever their subjective desires happen to be. But don't you think you should be nice to your wife and kids?
You should really take care of your kids. Man.
It's like, well,
no, it's insane. It's totally insane. And I see this at almost every level. There's this, there's on the one hand this argument for like, yeah, we're all competing individuals. We're all supposed to simply maximize our utility. And then, by the way, don't be racist. By the way, don't be greedy.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, because this moment that we're in, it really is a post-liberal moment, because And maybe this is why we didn't see it coming. Why I couldn't see it coming. And if I had been more reflective, maybe I should have, or I should have, because Roe is overturned. The whole regime is overturned. So like the liberal constitution of that fundamental human relationship is overturned at the very moment that the liberals themselves are abandoning liberalism. Do you see what, like
you mean in the racist or in the anti-racist movement, or is that not what you mean?
Well, across what's commonly called woke,
like
you know, what
the social
like,
justice,
like the
liberal,
social justice, the whole feel of our political culture now is one of moral conviction,
Totally.
self-righteousness, absolute inflexible vilifying of your enemy, the conviction that you are right, they are wrong. You ought to use the power you have to eliminate the people who are wrong
Yep.
and do what's right.
Yep.
Right now, that's a post-liberal posture.
Yeah, no one is going out there and thinking like, okay, let's look through the books and make sure that the rights are all in proper harmony.
I mean, the rhetoric of rights is fading away. The rhetoric of rights. I mean, you saw this obviously with the whole COVID regime and everything, but the reason why the rhetoric of it is fading away is because it doesn't have the appeal anymore.
Totally.
Right? Like what it doesn't. It's not resonating with the people. Like what the people want is right and wrong.
Yeah.
Justice, injustice. You know, and that's then becoming the way in which everyone in the political space is speaking.
Yeah.
And then so there's a real appropriateness that the fundamental constitution of political society, that relationship between the child and their parents, is now being returned to the realm of the political arguments over right and wrong.
Yeah. Right.
You know.
Yeah, and I think that's why the protests were so lame. I mean, I really did think at first, and this shows maybe where I was mistaken. I thought there were going to be big protests.
I didn't.
I think one of the reasons I thought that was because I believed that rights language still had efficacy. Because when you protest, when you throw a brick through a window, it's because you're feeling something strong, right? And if you're going to feel that, I mean, feeling passion is always at the level of morality, right?
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the idea that I had was that there is this strong conviction of having a right to abortion, and that once that is threatened in any way, it's going to lead to great passion. But what I actually now am coming to realize is no one believed that, actually. No one believed in the rights language as
I
being
think that was
the real
just
thing.
it was this facade that
Useful.
It was the field on which moral arguments and power politics were being played.
Yeah.
And no one, and I think the big difference between the racial issue and the BLM riots and that sort of thing, there's many differences actually. I mean, one important one is just the context of COVID, and the frustration and angst that was in society as a whole in that moment. But then also the protests had this us versus them, and the them were cops who were active, who the characterization was that they were actively committing violence against minorities.
Yep.
You know, and there's a heroic kind of like fighting these armed men for justice type of a thing, and there's a lot of appeal to that.
Yeah, totally.
But abortion doesn't have that.
Right.
Like a right to abortion is this, it's this sort of intellectual or abstract conception that when it actually gets down to the nitty gritty, like down to the actual ground level, people are kind of creeped out by it.
Totally. Yeah.
Right. Like no one really wants to talk about it.
Totally. I mean, even like the rhetoric from the Democrats is always like, well, we really shouldn't be doing this, but we have to let people choose to do this, which is the least inspiring thing I've ever heard.
Well, yeah, I mean,
and every now and then you have temps, through various campaigns, shout your abortion, be proud of your abortion, that sort of thing that always fizzle and fall flat.
Because they're creepy.
Yeah.
Because when people see it, what they see is an ugly thing.
Yeah.
And you see the most hardcore pro-abortion people that switch over to like a hatred of the infant.
Yeah, they're not
like
talking about rights
glorying
anymore.
and killing the baby.
Yeah.
And it crosses over into this like spiteful, angry thing, which is ugly because why? Because it's like the opposite of motherhood. Right? And we all love mothers.
Yeah.
I mean, like when you see those protests, you're like, wow, this is like it goes against our aesthetic because it goes so fundamentally against our morals.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because morality is always concerned with how we maintain the use of power for the sake of the weak, as opposed to the use of power for the sake of self-interest. I mean,
Right,
this
yeah.
it's the most brutal way of doing it. You don't think about it. You just reject that kind of use of power wherever you see it.
Yeah, I mean
And you praise the other kind of use of power wherever you see that.
Yep.
It seems like you are arguing, it sounds to me, that the return of the question of abortion to the states is a return to essentially a moral argument.
That's at least the language that's in the decision.
Yeah.
Right? We'll see what happens in the states.
Yeah.
I mean, like, for example, here in Ohio, we had a trigger law that went into effect that didn't completely ban abortion, but almost did. And immediately the ACLU is suing in court. They're going to try to get our courts to rule it unconstitutional according to the Ohio Constitution.
Oh, so they're just doing it on
They're
a
just
smaller
doing the
level.
same thing that they did in the Supreme Court here.
Yeah.
No, and that's happening all over the country. So will it really be returned to the legislatures,
Yeah.
to the lawmakers, or will the judges? We'll see what happens. But
Yeah. No, it strikes me that when you think about like slavery in this country is obviously the
parallel.
parallel, because we're about to divide into free states and slave states. Or we
Right.
have essentially divided into free states and slave states, although the free states aren't yet entirely free until they ban abortion entirely, which might be worth talking about. But
I think we do need to talk about that.
But when you look at the history of slavery, it's very obvious that the people that were actually making abolition happen were not motivated at all by the questions of abstract rights. That on the ground they were furious over an obvious injustice.
Slavery is an abomination.
An abomination that is obvious according to the very nature of the people who are oppressed and the nature of the oppressors. Like
Right, that's right.
They are not acting according to human nature.
Yeah, it's not some sort of
inhuman.
violation of the social contract.
Right, exactly.
It's an act of tyranny.
And it's not that you didn't. It's not that you didn't have those arguments.
Sure.
But they always happened later and usually in response. I mean,
It's like that's the way you make laws in a liberal regime, but that's not what you actually think.
Right,
Like
exactly.
what you actually think is that
yeah.
slavery is horrendous.
And everyone has this insight, right? Because we kind of pretend like, and the Supreme Court has to do this, I guess, by its sort of charter. But the Supreme Court has to pretend that what it's doing is sort of disinterestedly looking at the law itself and its structure and the basic norms and precedents, and then deciding it's a bad law. Sure, that happened. But what everyone knows is that the political battle was to get the people who don't want to kill children to be the ones who look at the law and decide.
I know
whether it's
this was
good or
one.
bad.
This was one of the things
mean,
that was
Roe v.
awesome
Wade-
about Trump.
Yeah.
Right. Is he just said it?
Yeah.
Like remember, I mean, he just said it. I'll put pro-life justices on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
like, and there was a profound naivete in him just saying that, right? Because that's off script.
Yeah, like every the conservatives. I mean,
I mean, we all
conservatives.
knew that. That's why the pro-lifers have been voting for Republicans for decades.
Right.
But it was off script to say it.
Right, and this is why the Republicans have been so dissatisfying to pro-lifers, because like what Republicans are what you have to do. So the translation of morality into rights-based language is how you get the job done.
Right.
And everyone knows it because everyone does it. Mm-hmm. Right. So on the left, it's the same thing.
Look at gay marriage.
Yeah.
Right. I mean that obviously they just think it is morally right for that to be an allowed thing, and it's morally wrong to stop it. Mm-hmm. And then they
Figure out how
they
we're going to
figure
make that
out the
work.
rights language they need to get the right and get the people on the court they need and make it happen.
And you think that you think that there's a possibility that we can be more honest with this on a state level?
I hope so. I mean,
Yeah.
like I think there is an opening and a possibility for us to enshrine in law the truth. And one of the great things about doing that would be that it changes the whole constitution of the regime, right? Because now the regime becomes about obligation as much as about right. You know, it's actually both of those things are like the wrong way of framing it. It becomes about mutual relationships. and the role of the state then becomes to foster and protect relationships rather than negotiating contracts, basically, or
Yeah.
mediating contracts. So the common good, what I'm saying is the common good can emerge as actually the object of politics.
Right.
And I also think that a great thing about that, if we're willing to do this, is that it would allow the states to fit into the new regime or the new way of understanding themselves, pursuit of the common good in other avenues. I mean, pursuit of the common good against predatory corporations, pursuit of the common good, like all of a sudden those things aren't violations of liberalism because we're not liberal anymore.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So
And I think a pushback on this would be, obviously, the Roe v. Wade didn't come out of nowhere. It made sense to a certain degree to people who are liberal. And so there's an argument that, well, okay, you get rid of Roe v. Wade, but you're not affecting some kind of conversion where everyone starts thinking differently. What you're going to actually get is just more liberal arguments happening at
But see,
lower
I
levels.
don't think that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is brand new. It could be wrong, but it seems like there's like slavery. Once the issue is not enshrined in some sort of mystical, sanctified constitutional thing,
Yeah.
so now it's back into the political realm.
Yeah.
Then the rhetoric is free to become more, what am I trying to say? More extreme, more hardcore, more real.
Yeah.
Right. And because of the way politics works, because of the political divisions, as one side ramps it up, the other side ramps it up in response. Mm-hmm. Right. So I guess what I'm getting at is there's splitting into free states and murder states. I don't know what we're going to call them. I'll call them murder states.
Yeah.
Is maybe a way for maybe it's a political reality that allows the pro-life arguments in the life states to become more pure.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Right? Like because the bad guys over in New York are doing this.
Yep.
And we're the good guys here in Ohio.
Yep.
And so now we don't have to mitigate our language into this like muddling, lukewarm, liberal stuff. We can just call a spade.
Yeah.
Those people are wicked.
Yeah, abortion.
Right?
Abortion is murder, and why would you want to be a murderer?
Murderer, like those
Yeah.
guys, and it allows. So I mean, this sounds sort of Machiavellian, I think, but there's a reality here to the way politics works. That there's an opening. There'll be an opening in the mainstream in life states to arguments that maybe weren't really available to them previously.
Yeah, no, as long as you have to argue that the fetus has this right that you have to defend over and against other potential rights, you've lost all power and you've lost all passion. Like what motivates is the fight against injustice. And I do think it's the case that in states where you can frame your opposition to abortion as an act of justice opposing all wickedness, then you're right. You're structurally open to doing the same when it comes to anything. Mm-hmm. Financial practices of banks, for instance. Mm-hmm. Like, why do we always have to go after people because they are corrupt according to some pre-existing legal structure? Why do we have to go after them? Like, why can't we go after them because they're wicked?
Yeah, exactly. Or why can't our legal structure be about wickedness?
Yeah, which for most of human history,
It has been. Yeah, that's right.
No, liberalism is an oddity in this regard.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it wants it to make it sort of abstain from the question of morality in order to have the negotiation of abstract principles of right.
Exactly. So I guess what I'm hopeful about is that while as of right now our pro-life stance, because it's been institutionalized in the Roe regime, in fighting against the Roe regime, hasn't turned that corner yet, right, to where we're talking about truth.
Yeah.
We're still operating within this liberal thing, and we have laws that were designed in order to get through the Roe regime courts, and we have, all that kind of stuff. But the big switch will be, can we turn that off?
Yeah.
Can we now go at it in a positive way instead of in this kind of negotiated negative way?
Yeah, let's be a state that can't kill children.
Outright.
And you get punished if you kill a child.
Yeah, and also you can't kill old people.
Totally.
And also you have to care for people.
Right. And
also you have to,
right, if there's
and also you can't rip poor people off. And also you
Yeah.
can't, you can't lie as a politician because that's immoral.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And you can't lie as a business. You
Because that's immoral. Right.
Marketing is illegal. Year 3.
Year 3. No, I mean, like once that cat's out of the bag, it feels like we can start being political again.
And then I think we should acknowledge, though, the same is true for everyone.
Well, that's exactly what the people on the left are doing, right? They're reintegrating morality into politics.
Yes.
Right, and they're attempting to construct their moral state, their moral regime.
Yeah.
It's just immoral.
Yeah.
And so there's it's a very weird moment, isn't it? Because you can feel how when that liberal regime starts to waver, how these things are going to I don't know, like spin apart, the different approaches.
Well, it does seem
dangerous.
It's very dangerous. It's the precondition for civil war,
Civil
at least
war,
for
yeah,
us,
yeah,
because the moment that we become a free state, we begin within the power of that state in simply concern for our people, right? So you always begin with the enactment of the laws and the defense of the laws for the people who are under the laws. But when the law is framed without liberalism, when the law is that no man should be so wicked as to kill his child, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no man should be so wicked as to do anything to a mother that would make her want to kill her child.
Right.
And this is like a simultaneous act because the object of politics is now relationships themselves and not mystically invented individual actors in contracts with each other. Okay. Mm-hmm. When that happens, it is not possible to look at the state next to you who is killing children, no matter why they say they're killing children, and not enter into a state of war. War is, and I don't.
You mean war in fundamental opposition? It may not be armed.
No, it may not be. I mean, this is what we talk about with war.
Right.
It's like
right.
you, in some ways, I don't mean to be too theoretical about this because I think we cover this a lot in the podcast on tyranny, right? Like, war isn't this. It's only, in a certain positive sense, something you declare and then enter into as a state.
That's
right?
kind of on the fringes of war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
War is when you see the oppression of the weak, when you see injustice, and you are opposed to it. Mm-hmm. Now, what you do, how you go to war, depends entirely on the degree of power and responsibility you have in relation to that injustice, right?
Exactly.
So maybe, especially at first, you have no power. Maybe the only power you have is to die for the sake of justice.
It's just resistance.
And it's martyrdom. It's resistance,
Yep.
right? But if you have enough power, the obligation is to liberate the weak and the oppressed.
That's
and you
right.
don't get to be a free state that looks at the slave state and says, well, that's them doing their thing.
That's right.
You can do that at first because that's the reality of the power difference, right? It's the reality that going to war is imprudent.
That's exactly right.
Like going to
going
arms.
actual arms is the wrong course of action.
But it would be a lie to describe.
I mean, strategically the wrong.
Strategically wrong. It'd be a lie to describe us as not de facto at war with slave states.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was the condition leading up to the Civil War. I think. Yeah. I mean, that became the reality.
Right. I mean,
but I think that is something we should not be afraid of here. I think that we need to precipitate a crisis in order to have a reconstitution of a regime, right? Like a crisis and then the possibility of some refounding.
Yeah.
Is what is demanded.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is what we should be doing. And so here at this opportunity, we need to, and this sounds very sort of martial and aggressive, I guess, but we need to take up as much ground on the field as possible. Mm-hmm. So passing laws, enshrining serious language, getting the rhetoric out, like taking ground.
Yeah.
Is what needs to happen.
Yeah. Basically reviewing all rhetorical tactics, that operate on the basis of rights language and reforming them and reshaping them to be on the basis of moral language. Mm-hmm. would be extremely effective in solidifying free states as free states.
I think that's right. I think it has more appeal. Way more appeal. So I think it would be more effective rhetorically. I mean, this is something that I think we've talked about in a previous podcast, where if you talk to pro-life activists who are on the actual front lines, like the street counselors, pro-life activists, bless them, that they, the arguments that work with the women who are walking into the abortion clinics are not rights arguments.
Your baby has rights.
The arguments that work are arguments about motherhood,
yes,
and about God and and you and your baby and the relationship between, and the baby's a gift, and the baby's going to enrich your life, and your happiness will be tied to the happiness of the child. Like, these are the things that actually work, because we're human beings, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
And so when we start making those arguments, right, and making them politically, that's going to have more appeal.
Oh, absolutely.
And it wouldn't have won in the courts in the Roe regime, but hey, that's gone.
Totally gone. Yeah, because you remember this, right? Where you can make a appeal that went something like you described, and then be met with the kind of blank defensive response of, well, I agree with all that, but it's still her right to choose an abortion. I simply support the right to choose an abortion, right? Like, that became very few people ever dared argue for the morality of abortion as such, would ever say, I see the goods of motherhood, I see the obligations of motherhood, and I want to speak about the goods of abortion and the obligation of abortion, because it never worked. It just fizzled out. Like,
well, when it's attempted, it gets ridiculous. I mean, I saw a clip the other day of MSNBC them talking about the significance of Roe being overturned, and like what they were talking about was the economic fallout.
Right.
And it was like, oh my goodness, women are going to take time off work, and that's going to hurt these companies' bottom lines and the GDP. And I'm just like, oh, guys, like, first of all, yeah, good. And secondly, that does not convince. I should hope that doesn't convince anyone that abortion is the positive good you can come up with is that we're going to make more money.
Yep, that's what the World Economic Forum. the World Economic Forum just released this this thing that Jacob Hyman sent me that was like, like mothers lose 70,000 pounds in wages compared to child-free women. Like, right after the Roe decision, this was released, and so what they're basically,
as if that's supposed to mean anything to you.
Well, but it's fascinating.
It's like, why wouldn't you just say, yeah, whatever?
But the pivot is fascinating because the pivot is to say, it's to turn to another source of power, right? Because corporations in America have a international power that transcends, obviously, state boundaries. And this is the maybe the reality of what we're facing is we can talk about, and we should talk about, free states and slave states. But we've also developed a state corporate tyranny that can ship pills to any house to perform abortions. And that it's what I'm saying is you look at like Amazon, providing $4,000, I think it was, to move women to a state where they can get an abortion.
Yeah, a bunch of corporations are doing this.
Oh yeah, and obviously that fits well with their bottom line because their success is entirely predicated on extracting the wealth of motherhood out of motherhood, literally. Like, where there are mothers, there's less wealth for the
anywhere where there's a human value that isn't monetized is a lack of efficiency.
It shall be monetized.
People care about something. That means we could sell something there. There's a desire there, which means we can shift it into material desire.
Totally.
It's nasty.
But it seems to me like that is the third term in this argument, right? You have the free state, you have the slave state, and then you have the kind of global corporate, I'll just call it a tyranny, but like that will always attempt to retain within, over and against locality, over and against positive legal states. It will attempt to maintain abortion as a choice. Mm-hmm. So like, it will never, and this I think matters on a fundamental spiritual level, right? Because it's not, the overturn of Roe v. Wade is the overturn of this insidious promotion of looking at other people as a choice. looking at other people as something that you decide to allow to live.
Yeah, for some question of utility.
Yes.
Whether that utility is material or psychological, emotional, whatever.
Right.
Some usefulness.
So even when your state says we will not fall prey to this wickedness, every child is a gift, you have Amazon essentially acting as an alternative source of positive law that says, I promise you can still look on your child as a choice. You can still practice a
right,
practical...
because I'm going to put you on an airplane to California. Mm-hmm. But the thing here would be that if we did what I'm suggesting and we reframed our legal regime in a positive way as opposed to this negative way,
then they just become the enemy.
Then we've now set the the framework necessary to legislate against that behavior.
Yeah, totally.
Right, like we now those rights of the corporations to do these things are now no longer somehow incapable of being regulated.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly empowering of the actual creative project of world building.
Yeah, politics it's called.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, my thought on this has been maybe more like wide scale, because you remember we argued a while back in this article entitled "What Abortion Means," that abortion is a certain sacrament of liberalism, like it enacts it in some ways. And this goes to that question I had. Well, aren't we still just liberals at heart? Aren't we going to just do liberal things with our states? You're saying no, and I think.
Well, I'm hoping that this is a chance.
Well, but
to
I
break
think
free
one of
that.
the reasons I think
I'm
that
worried
sounds
about it.
Well, it sounds convincing in reference to like biblical history, because it's whenever you build something up to a certain sacred point, it's also simultaneously making it extremely vulnerable. So what I mean by that is, it's not simply the case that abortion just got enshrined into the Constitution, and that was on the basis of basically a cultural acceptance of abortion being defended in that way. It's also the case that because it's enshrined at this high point, it's very capable of falling. Like it habituates people to believe that abortion is sort of up there as a right. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's how we view the Constitution. It's kind of a god. It says certain things. We don't question it. We don't ask if the Constitution's right. We just interpret it.
I don't know. A god. Maybe I'm inspired.
Yeah,
like it's revelation from the god.
Yeah. And then, so what this creates though is that if you can then say, nope, this thing that was in the Constitution that shouldn't have been a constitutional right, you actually have created a bunch of people habituated to simply say, oh, guess it's not a right anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a little insidious. What I mean is, if we are the kind of people who don't really practice politics, we don't govern ourselves, we don't ask questions about right or wrong, we engage in this liberal project in which we just have this procedural model of producing positive law, then there's a flip side to it, right? Which is that when something is no longer enshrined as that right that it's been enshrined, then there's a real toppling of the god. We can just say, okay, that's not one of our rights now.
Interesting.
And I think that
I
like
think
it's
I
like
can see
in
that.
some ways I think it's a grave mistake to simply put things into the Constitution, because it's like, well, if you give it all of that weight, then it's not like we can simply say, you either have to argue, no, it really does belong in the Constitution, or it just doesn't have any sacred power anymore. It doesn't.
Don't you think it overturning it reveals the man-madeness of the idol?
Totally.
Right, like it. How could it used to be in the Constitution, but then now not?
Well, and the court,
Right.
like one of the big problems of the court is its own. They call it like judicial hubris, I think, but they mean it positively. I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination,
Right.
but the sense of the fact that the court can be trusted is essential in all the decisions to be made. Like, we cannot violate the sort of appearance of dignity and.
Well, this is the reason why they wear special clothes.
Of course.
Because they're priests.
Right. So when you put something up there for 30 years and then you take it back down again, you do have this more fundamental opening up which maybe is part of this unsettling feeling, right? Like, oh no, it's up to us actually.
Right, exactly.
Like no one is exempt from the political work.
That is what's unsettling about it.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's a real opportunity. It's a real opportunity for us. I think there's a real moment here, and I hope that we jump on it, because the temptation is to be lazy, right, and to settle in and to just actually think, oh, this is kind of a big bother, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and to go back to watching TV or whatever we do, and I think that has to be resisted. I think fearing conflict has to be resisted. We have to not fear conflict here.
Yeah.
We have to square up to it.
No, it's the beginning of a fight. It's not the end.
That's right. Yeah.
It's just that the kind of mystical resolution of the fight has been revealed as a sham. There was never a resolution. We knew that. That's why we're all arguing all the time.
Right. We knew that.
So now the gloves are off. And I think it's worth it. What motivates me here is that abortion is about producing a certain kind of society. It is not a question of simply this individual fetus, can you kill it, can you not? Because a people who kill and a people who do not kill are different kinds of people.
That's right. Absolutely.
There's a phrase in the abortion movement that I think is probably the most insidious phrase ever uttered in all of human history, and it's every child a wanted child. So I think the Clintons did some of this for a while.
Unbelievable.
But it's psychopathic when you think about it. It has this immediate... At first, you're kind of baffled by the rhetoric, and so you kind of, I guess it's good to be wanted, so that seems like a good goal. But then you think about it, well, what you mean is any child that's unwanted is dead. So what abortion does is it produces a population that has been reduced to those who were wanted by other human beings. But this means that it achieves in liberalism, right? Because now the entire human population is the product of human choice. It's literally human sacrifice is our best effort at creating a population of people who come from man.
That's right. Yeah, this is the reason why pagan regimes do it.
Yeah,
all of them.
Right, because if there is a transcendent giver, that then everything is under judgment. Every king, every power, every principality is under judgment. If human existence itself can be reduced, even if it's simply through an illusion, but if it can be reduced to that which we choose to live, that which we allow to live, all the people you see with an abortion regime are those people who have been allowed to live. And to live in a society in which everyone, your neighbors, your family, and yourself, are people who are allowed to live by other human beings, then you are different. Your psychological state in this life is different. Your relationships are different. Like they can through religious conversion break through that and come to really accept the givenness of yourself and everyone, but only through great difficulty.
No, this is why, like when I was mentioning those early modern political theorists, why they did that, why they had the ability to kill the child at the beginning in their theories, because in order to create a man-created world, like where man is at the top, man is sovereign, man is God, that is required, because as soon as you open up relationality as the basis, so human relationships as the basis for order, and so you have what you're doing there is you're making a move into realist metaphysics, because you're arguing that the natures of these things have inclinations towards each other and towards ends that are bound together that are not dependent upon the power of higher things, but come from intrinsic to what they are. And the higher thing that they are aiming at is ultimately the transcendent God. So the point would be that God, or the good, the true, the transcendentals, but God ultimately he's active at every stage in the social hierarchy, right? The whole is moving towards its end, which is happiness, and each of the parts, as those parts, are moving towards that telos as them, not as commissioned by a higher power, subject to a higher power, or ordered by some higher power, but exactly within their reality, their ontological reality, which is in relation to other beings
Right.
that are moving towards this end, which is God, the transcendent.
Yeah.
So to remove that that fundamental relationality is the move to remove God.
Yes.
Okay, so like God
Yep.
is no longer at every stage in every relationship. God is now, if he exists at all, he's beyond.
Yep.
He's out there, and the whole thing, we have some ruler, however that's constituted, that sort of mediates God to us.
Yeah.
But we only get God through him.
No, I mean this is the story of Babel, which within the Hebrew commentaries is a nation of child sacrifice, and it's a nation constituted precisely to not need to deal with God. It sits in one place. It kills children to keep its population down. And it claims that there's no outside. This is part of the like mystical tradition on Babel, and it does make a good deal of sense, right? If I look around and say everyone who was chosen by man, then whether or not there's a God is unimportant. You could posit God as a sort of object of natural theology, maybe like, well, we had to get something out of nothing, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, if it's man who decides on man, then God is simply maybe providing us with some of the first materials from which we work. But that's about it.
That's about it, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that to live in a nation of allowed life is to become a certain kind of people, right? It's to become a people who are deeply worried about whether they're still allowed. I mean, you think about this, like if it's the case that we can kill our children and then those children grow up, then it means that the fundamental attack on the parent-child relationship is that the parent now says to the child that for reasons of my own interest, whatever those are, I chose not to kill you, right? But that relationship, creates a fear. Like it literally creates fear as a feeling and a sense of the entire society.
Yes, I
because
think this is right.
Life begins by being threatened, and then by that threat being withheld, which means that you literally exist under a hovering knife. I mean, and that seems to me to better describe liberal societies today, which is that you have people who, for weird reasons, they don't know why, feel like they have to assert themselves as being viable, constantly have to assert themselves as being not killable, constantly have to prove themselves, where every defect, every abnormality, every sign of weakness can only be allowed if it's reconstrued as some kind of strength that is a reason for no one to kill you. So what I mean is you have an entire nation of people who have been allowed to live and so are worried that they will no longer be allowed to live. And this is what a slave state feels like.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it would be important for what I would throw in on this would be that your analysis here doesn't require a direct causal link.
Right.
I mean, what I mean is that what you're saying is that what I hear you saying is that a society of vulnerable, fearful individuals is a society that kills its children.
Correct.
Right, and that those things go together always, right? Because of the reasons that you just gave, and the willingness to kill the child is itself a part of the fear, right? Like the person who kills the child, think about the pagan child sacrifice regimes. Like they do so because of fear of power.
Yep.
Right, and that's why it's demanded of them, that act of submission. Yeah. And again, like in an abortion regime, the choice to have an abortion is because of what? Because you want all the other goods that society promises you. Yeah. So there's a fear in it from the very beginning. So I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it works from both directions. It's not there's and this, I think this goes back to just classic political theory, that the moral character of the people that inhabit a regime is integral to the regime.
Yeah, totally. No, I mean, this obviously has to be the case, right? Because you had people positing, like Hobbes, that human existence is really the decision of a mother not to kill her child within a society in which abortion was abhorrent. Right. So it's not the claim that you have to have the one to cause the other. It's precisely the claim that there is a synchronicity and a fulfillment of liberalism in abortion, and there's simultaneously a reification and actualization of liberalism by the act of abortion.
I mean, it's a ritualized enacting of it.
Yes, absolutely, and it's a ritualized enacting that could only have taken place.
That has efficacy, actually, like a sacrament, right?
It does.
Like it renders it true. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it binds us to our society through blood guilt. I mean, the whole problem of abortion is that it produces a nation of sellouts, because what it allows you to do is to kill your child for the goods of the world. Once you kill your child for the goods of the world, then you are bound to those goods, because you have to always assert them as being of equal or higher value to a child, to a human person, to your own son, right? And so, like, we look at this, we're like, why are all these crazy pagan, regimes in the Old Testament just sacrificing their sons whenever they really need something done? And it's a passing through fire, quite literally, because you put your own society to the test. You say, okay, I killed for my society, so now I should, the society has to be as good as the thing I lost. And it seems to me that this is the great relativizing. On the ground, this is how the church gets relativized within liberal regimes, because when you have the tendency towards, and then ultimately the capacity for killing your children, then your various reasons for not killing your children simply fit within the logic of choice that liberalism gives you.
Oh, you happen to be Christian.
Yeah. Okay. So you're Catholic, so you have some beliefs.
That's your desire fulfillment strategy.
You fulfilled your desires by not killing your children.
Right.
This person has these desires. She fulfills them by killing her child. That's literally the arguments of Roe.
I run into this all the time.
Right?
I mean, I don't mean to derail you.
No, please.
But like, I have a big family. I have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And I run into this all the time with very simple comments, like people saying things to me like, "Oh, you must really love children."
Yeah.
But it's because the only way they can conceive of why I would have 9 kids is because I must really enjoy 2-year-olds.
It's hilarious, because you definitely don't.
No, it's like, no, that's actually not why. I mean, I love my children, of course, but it's like this.
I'm not satisfying an individual
this
desire
isn't a
for
lifestyle
9 children.
choice. Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, to get at what you're saying, that's
yeah,
my
totally. And you can see this in even in Amazon's sort of okay, we're going to provide the abortions, is that I think there's this fundamental spiritual reality that people are all aware of, but it doesn't often come to expression, which is that as long as you can kill children for the goods of the world, then the goods of the world can be maintained as sacred. So if you are a woman working for Amazon, right, the reason Amazon bends over backwards, or at least seems to, I guess it's not hard for them. The reason that they say, we will provide for your abortion against whatever state law you happen to exist in, is not simply, of course, the rhetoric is, well, it's healthcare or whatever, which is insane. But what's really happening is they're saying that we need to be the objects of choice that are comparable in our holiness, or I shouldn't say holiness, in our sacredness.
Totally. Like you chose to have the child. That means you chose not to have your career at Amazon.
Right. Exactly. And when we can, it creates a habit, right? So you can't simply kill children and then walk on through your day as if nothing changes. What it does is it binds you to the major institutions of power for which you killed in the first place, to question them, to question the value of career, of capital, of gain, of our current regime, of government, of the very notion itself of individual self-satisfaction. It no longer becomes just an odd intellectual exercise. To question them becomes to be convicted of being a murderer. If I question the reasons that I killed the child for, it means that I unjustifiably killed the child. And that is a psychologically untenable position for people. So why don't we really talk about abortion? Why don't we really think about it through? Because we can't. If we think about it, then we'll realize that the world that we have purchased with the price of blood. And we do not want to be murderers because we're good. Right. And so we enter into this fugue state, right, where we simply don't solve the problem. We don't make it a moral issue. And I think this goes to what you're saying, because the point is that this will change the world. You cannot maintain the world you have and ban abortion, right?
It's a regime change.
When and I think a good one, right? Because the regime I'm imagining, and again, like, obviously this is it is an exercise of political imagination, right? Is that you create a people through the ban of abortion, right? And a particular people, because people who have been taught and habituated into a sort of sacralized belief in the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. So it has a real power. It's not just like an oddity of law. You create a people who are habitually disposed to value each other over themselves and over all those who promise to work only for themselves. You create a check, like a moral and habitual check on the scope of human hubris. You live in a world in which you say, yeah, you can ask a lot of me, but I'm not going to kill my kid.
Right.
I wouldn't even think about it. So I can't think about you as a possible thing to kill my kid for.
No, in fact, the child is unkillable, which means all the goods that are presented to the world have to be ordered towards the prosperity of me and the child together.
Exactly.
How can Amazon
serve the fundamentally unkillable child as the only option left if it is illegal for Amazon to kill?
Right.
Or if it's illegal for the Amazon employee to kill your child.
No, I know. That's what I mean. It destroys liberalism.
I think so, yeah.
It's a moment. We need to seize it.
Well, the seizing of it will be, it'll be a long, hard work. And I think what we're going to see immediately is a certain purification of the conservative movement between people who are willing to essentially make the moral argument, dive right in, realize that this is, between those people, I basically consider them as abolitionists. And then between people who are going to, for the sake of their perception of a larger liberal order, going to continue the habit of making liberal arguments, of only doing things on the basis of rights, of looking for compromise positions. And that will become...
I mean, there's going to be a lot of people on the Republican side that enjoyed having the pro-lifers as just these dependable voters.
Totally.
Who are all of a sudden going to say, oh, whoa, now these pro-lifers want some action.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
And I don't know how many of them are going to be up for it.
Yeah,
so we'll see.
Right, because as long as it was Roe v. Wade, everyone could throw up their hands.
Like, well, we can only do so much. It's the courts.
Yeah.
I know. Enough. Now let's do something.
Good. All right. We'll go to it. Change your rhetoric first, and then the politics will follow, I think. Yeah. All right. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We really appreciate it. Our prayers for you and for the nation. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.